Hello and welcome to the Securities Training Corporation, or STC's, FINRA licensing presentation for those professionals taking the Series 79 and Series 63 examination. Some of you may only be taking the 79 and not the 63, so you can only listen to the first portion. If you're taking both exams, please listen to both sections of the presentation. So let's talk generalities for this presentation. This introduction is we're going to talk about the exam itself, the study material and the questions, as well as the class presentation. And some of you will be taking a live class, some of you will be taking a class through WebEx, some of you might be taking a class through an on-demand lecture, or maybe more than one way of taking the class. So again, we're going to talk about the exam itself, the study material, and our questions, as well as a classroom environment. Okay. Now, first up is the Series 79 is an exam that is required by FINRA, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, if someone is going to be employed at a brokerage firm in the capacity of what's referred to as an investment banking representative. So the Series 79 is required by someone who's going to be categorized at the firm as an investment banking representative. If someone was taking the Series 7 exam, they would be what's called a general securities representative. Okay, let's talk about the exam itself. It is 185 multiple choice questions. All the questions are A, B, C, D. Some are except. Some are Roman numeral, where we are saying which two of the following are true, which two of the following are facts about something. And it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 2 in 3, and 2 in 4. There are 10 experimental questions. So it's a 185 total. You're graded on 175. You're given 5 hours. That's a long seating. So that day of the exam, you want to be pumped to take this test. You don't want to be tired. You don't want to do an all-nighter and then try to take the test 5 hours. And most students find that they do take 4 to 5 hours to complete the exam because some of the questions are pretty lengthy. Some will require calculations, and sometimes you want to check your numbers on the mathematical questions, and some of the long questions, even the non-calculation, may require you to read the question once or twice. Now, the passing score is, they say in the Series 79 based on level of difficulty, since its inception, it's been 73% of 175 questions. And of that 185 questions, students report around 15 to 20 calculations. Some people say less, some people say a little bit more. A calculation can be one calculation. So we're dividing one number into another number and coming up with one number. Some may require multiple calculations in the same question. You are given a calculator at the exam center. It's a 4-function solar-powered calculator. No present value on the examination. Add, multiply, subtract, and divide. The challenge is sometimes you may have to do the same formula, calculating, let's say, EV to EBITDA on 4 companies to figure which one's the most undervalued or which one's the most overvalued. So let's go through the breakdown of the number of questions on the exam, and let's correlate that to the chapters in the STC manual, and we'll be discussing the manual in just a few minutes. So, Section 1, collection, analysis, and evaluation of data, that is 75 questions. That relates to our chapters 2, 3, 4, 8, and 9. Let me repeat that. 2, 3, 4, 8, 9 correspond to 75 questions on the examination. Where to find information and the analysis of that information. Now, the second section, which is 43 questions, relates to underwriting, new issues, types of offering, registration of securities. That is 43 questions. That is our chapters, relates to chapters 5 and 6. And many students find that a very challenging area because there's very detailed-oriented questions on this examination. If some of you have taken other tests, let's say the Series 7, the Series 7 is not as detail-oriented as the Series 79 is. So the amount of information on the 79 is much less than the Series 7, but the detail is much heavier on the 79 than it is in the 7, in case you've taken that exam sometime in the past. Next up, 34 questions on M&A, tender offers, financial restructuring, which is bankruptcy, Chapter 7 and 11. And that is 34 questions. That is our Chapter 7. I'll discuss the chapters in just a few minutes. A very challenging area. And lastly, our general securities industry regs, 23 questions. That tends to be one of the easiest sections of the examination. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to discuss the chapters, a little bit about them in general, and what you should focus on before going through the test questions. Okay. So, Series 79 materials. There is a 9-chapter study manual and 6 online final exams, each with 185 questions. Chapter 1, which is that 23 questions, a great, fantastic way to increase your score. Because you don't need 73% on each area, you need 70% in totality, and this represents not the most challenging area. They're detailed-oriented questions, but they're not overly difficult. So it talks about registration. It talks about filing of a U4, arbitration, stock buybacks, insider trading, some general information which is presented on the exam, some best practices, could be the GIF rule, a number of different things. Read the chapter carefully. Don't use a highlight, just get a general sense of the information. One of my favorite chapters, and I think the 79 is a very good test for an investment banking professional, is data collection, where to find things. And it's really focusing on who files the form, when is it filed, why is it filed, and what information could be gathered from that information. So who files 10Ks? When do you file an 8K? What would dictate filing an 8K, and when would you file it? Who files a 13D? What percentage do you need to own of a company to file it? Proxy information. So, for example, they may ask you on the exam, where would you find the most detailed information on executive compensation? Well, the answer would be the proxy. They do that. If you wanted to know who the largest shareholders are, one of the good places you could look at is a 13D. There are a good number of questions from Chapter 2, so read that chapter very carefully. It's a short chapter, but make sure you read it carefully. Okay, Chapter 3 and 4, basic securities, basic knowledge on economics. Just skim these chapters. Don't spend that much time reading them. There's not that many questions on the exam, and you can learn a lot of what you need to know by looking through the exam questions as well. Chapter 5 and 6 are very, very important. So Chapter 5 covers information on the IPO process, follow-on debt and equity offerings, private placements under Regulation D, and basic 144, 144A transactions. Very detailed-oriented chapter. Make sure you read it very carefully. The information in this chapter is generally not covered whether you're an analyst or an associate, and whether you took a finance class or not, unless you took a securities law class dealing with underwritings and public and private offerings, then you'd be in good shape. But other than that, most of the information for this chapter will be new. As well as Chapter 6, underwriting, which covers research rules, the underwriting spread, corporate financing rules, Regulation M, things of that nature. And whether it's an SEC or a FINRA rule doesn't really matter, but it's not just knowing the rule, it's the application of the rule. And that's a very big portion of this exam, especially dealing with Chapters 5 and 6, is that you're going to get questions where there might be an exhibit book question, and this exam does have an exhibit book. It's usually embedded in the questions, where you might be reading information from the cover page of a prospectus or some of the financial information, and you ask questions based on that. And sometimes the length of the question is very important, very large, and you need to read it very carefully. And the 4 choices are long. So you read the question, you read the 4 choices, and you got to remember, what was the question asking again? We always tell students to go back and reread the last sentence of the question. That's called the question stem, and that's the key to getting the question right. Look, it's a licensing test written by people in the industry, you may not like any of the 4 choices, but your job is to pick the best of those 4 choices. You can't write an E your own choice. It's a 4 A, B, C, D questions. So make sure you read the questions carefully, pick the best choice from the 4 listed, even though you might feel you don't like any of the choices. And lastly, you got to remember, 5 and 6 is really, really important. The application of these questions, not just memorizing, it is a fair amount of application questions. Now, Chapter 7 is really 4 main areas. 1, the auction process, the role of M&A, 338H10 elections, how companies are sold, letters of intent, indications of interest, the data room, the go shop and the no shop. A second section is the role of the buy side and the role of the sell side banker. Who does what? Who's looking out for it? Who wants to make sure the client could pay? Who wants to make sure that we do certain types of due diligence? A second area is bankruptcy. There's a good number of questions. Of those 34 questions, don't be surprised by 6 to 9 questions on bankruptcy. Chapter 7 and Chapter 11, the stalking horse bidder, things of that nature. And the last area, which is also very important, are the rules and procedures in tender offers. So not just the rules, the procedures. Why should a company pursue a tender offer versus, let's say, a straight M&A transaction, with proxies? So make sure you read Chapter 7 very carefully. Now, last up is Chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8 is financial statement analysis. If you've taken classes in financial analysis, you're an accountant, you've taken level 1 of the CFA, you should be fine with that. Some of your firms do financial analysis training in the investment banking analyst and associate program. They're going to cover way more than you need to know for the test. So you may just need to skim that chapter. And the same with Chapter 9, the valuation analysis. Calculating PE, enterprise value, EV to EBITDA, M&A valuation, comparable analysis. And remember, the valuation and financial analysis questions are not always calculation. It might be which ratio is most important, or which valuation metric would you use if the company has these characteristics, or what valuation metric would you use if the company has, let's say, has revenue, but hasn't generated any profit since its inception. So, again, there are some calculation questions. Some of them will use the exhibit book, some will not. Some will ask you to calculate EV to EBITDA on 4 companies. Might take a few steps to do that. Some of you may do that and really like it. Most of the students we train, pretty much for the 79, for the summer programs, tell us that the most important areas by far are Chapters 5, 6, and 7. Those are the most important areas for that group. That gives them the most amount of challenge. Okay, next up is discussing our final exams. In a few minutes, I'm going to be showing you what our STC test website looks like. First, I'm going to provide a general overview, and then we'll talk about the specifics as I show you the website. So, first thing you need to do is you received an email, or should have received an email, from either your administrator or STC, providing you with a link of www.stcinteractive.com. And on that link, you'll be given a username and password. Once you enter your username and password, there'll be a homeroom. In that homeroom will be the various courses, let's say Series 79, Series 79 and Series 63, whatever courses you're required to take in that homeroom. In addition, if the firm or yourself has purchased any additional coursework, such as our flashcards or on-demand lectures or other products we might have, they'll be in your homeroom as well. Now, there's 3 ways of taking our examinations. One method is the Q&A method, where the explanations pop up right away. That is our favorite method first, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes. The second method is the closed book simulated exam method, where the exams are timed And the third method is what's called the by-topic method, which is the entire question bank scrambled, but based upon the 9 chapters. And I'll show you that as well in just a few minutes. It is very important to remember that prior to taking the exams, you're going to have to download a PDF of the exhibit book. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. It'll help you answering certain questions. Now, you could print the exhibit book if you want and use it that way. You could minimize the exhibit book and show it that way. There are a variety of ways you can do it. And lastly, it's very important that you remember the key to passing this test, or any licensing test, is the final exams. Make sure you carefully read our explanations, because the explanation might explain why B is correct and A, C, and D are incorrect. And no matter how that question was worded on the exam, and remember, the actual exam questions will be worded differently than ours. So it's really important to read the explanations very carefully prior to taking the exam. Okay, so again, we're going to show you now what our website looks like. Now, once you've clicked into STC Interactive and you get your homeroom, and you click on Series 79, it'll say STC Series 79 Final Exams, 42nd edition. It'll have course contents. It'll have Q&A tool, as we mentioned earlier, closed book, and by topic. And there are some PDFs which might be of interest. Now, one of them we mentioned an exhibit book. So you would click on here, and the exhibit book would open up. And it would cover the information that you would need. And you can minimize it, make it smaller, so on and so forth. And you can go back here. I'll explain to you the crunch time facts in just a minute. So, for example, the Q&A method. You would click Q&A tool. There's no timer. And it doesn't matter which test you take. Each test is 185 questions. Now, the Q&A exams are not timed. So there's unlimited time remaining. And you'll notice here there's a user feedback button if you want to ask us a question or want to send us an email. You can go back to your homeroom. The contents will take you back to the content page, and there's a help button. You could grade the quiz, which you would do at the end, so you don't have to worry about keeping a score. You can pause it. At the end of the exam, before you grade it, you can review marked, and there's a marking here if you want to go back to a certain question, just like the actual test allows you to. And you can review all the questions you want. So you can review specific questions or all the questions. Okay. So you read through the question, read the 4 choices, and you click the answer. And you click, let's say, A. And it's correct. Now, if I had chosen B, B would have lit up, and A would be there as the correct answer. And then you read the explanation very carefully. Whether you get the question right or wrong, you read the explanation. It comes up right away. This number here on the bottom, you do not have to worry about. That's more for internal STC purposes. And you would go to the next question. So on and so forth. And you would read the question, try to answer it, and then score it. Let's get this one wrong. And it explains again. Now, so what some people do, if they get a question wrong and they want to remember this, what they sometimes do is they create their own notes. And they highlight this, such as, and then put that into their notes if they want. So people do that as well. And then at the end, you would grade the exam. Now, let's go back to contents. And if you do the closed book exams, and let's say we do exam 1, it is the same questions but scrambled. As you'll notice, first question is different. Now here, if we had chose D, no answer yet, because we're going to receive your score until the end. Now, most people, when they do the Q&A exams, do not get above a 73, and that's okay. Scoring is okay. When you do the closed book exam, and you take those same exams again, you should be scoring above 73. And if you are, you should be comfortable passing the actual examination. Now, if you look at it here, you choose an answer. and it keeps going. Notice there's a timer on the bottom. And again, you can mark this question review. So just like the actual test, you could see how long it takes you to do. You could mark the question at the end before you grade it. You can review those marked and just review all. You could have it possible. You could jump to a specific question, but only if you've completed all 185 questions. So it's very user-friendly. Now, lastly is the by topic. Let's assume you say, I've done a couple tests, and I just like to see maybe do 10 questions on valuation. So you can take 10 or all, and you go down and say valuation analysis. Now, I'm going to click 10, and I've already answered, that's why it's going over. Now, I want to talk to you about a time-saving method. Now, this question says, the relevant information needed to answer the following question is found on Exhibit 55. So we open up here, and we go to Exhibit 55. Of course, it's one of the last ones. Oh, it is the last one. And if it's too small for you, you can make it a little larger. There's Exhibit 55. So there's the information. Now, the question says a privately held business intends to conduct a public offering in order to expand its business. The company currently has debt of $48 million, and it wants to sell 45% of its shares in the offering. If the current IPO discount is approximately 10%, what is the range of proceeds to the company? Now, two methods of doing this. One, try to answer it on your own, and then click the explanation. Now, some people say, I know this business. I know how to do this, but it's going to take me a while to do the calculation. If I'd like to save time, what you can do as an option, click any answer. Doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong. Click A, let's say. You got it incorrect. And look at how the step-by-step. In other words, we show you how to do it. So if you're comfortable that all you need to do is be shown how to do it, why don't you do on a few of them? Just click the answer, correct or incorrect, and see how we did it. Now, again, if you want to try it, that's fine. The idea is that you may not be given that much time to study. Some people have a very short window of time to study. Some people have a longer window of time, and they got to go through the information. If you're comfortable with the accounting and valuation, this is simply a shortcut where we're suggesting. If you don't like this shortcut, please don't take it. If you do, it's just one way of looking at it. Okay, if we go back to contents, and we go back to by topic, we can see it's based upon the various chapters. One of the things you got to watch out for is if you only take the exams this way and you don't do the Q&A, is you might be getting a little bit of a false sense of security, because if you take all the questions on, let's say, underwriting or public or private offerings, it's all the same topic, and on the actual exam, the questions are scrambled. So you might get a question right by doing the by topic because you've just read the explanation from a question 2 or 3 ago, and that helped you get the answer, where in the actual test, your mind's got to have to learn to jump around a lot, from a valuation question to a data collection question to an underwriting question to an M&A question on bankruptcy. So be careful of that. Okay, going back to the course contents again. Another big area is this crunch time facts. That's very, very important. Now, what the crunch time facts are some last-minute items that you want to study a day or so before the exam, some facts you need to know. People have found this document very, very, very helpful. It's broken down by chapters. Many students have mentioned that by looking at this document, they get a handful, as many as 10 to 15 questions right, just by looking at this, because it's fact-based. So, for example, look at this one here. How many 10Qs does a company file? 3 per year. The last one's called a 10K. Look at a fact here. The annual proxy must be sent to shareholders at least how many days? 10 days, 20 days prior to the meeting date. A preliminary proxy is filed with the SEC at least 10 days. A lot of the factual information, not all of it, but a lot of it, is found in this document. It's a great document to read. There's a lot of great information in here. Here's another great one. Public float is equal to outstanding less restricted stock. Things of that nature. So it's really, really a good methodology. Now, the same methodology is found by both the Q&A, the closed book, and the by topic, as well as the crunch time facts for the Series 63. The only difference is no exhibit book for the 63. So let's go back, talk about the Series 63, and that will conclude our information about the exams, and then we'll spend just a few minutes on the classes, and that will be the end of the intro. Another exam some of you may be required to take is the Series 63 examination. Now, this is a state exam, not a federal exam, and the creator of this exam isn't FINRA like the Series 79 is. It's NASA, the North American Securities Administrators Association. And they are a group, NASA is a group of the 50 state administrators in each of the 50 states. Each state is represented by what's referred to as a commissioner or administrator, and they send representatives to create the body of work for this examination. So let's go through some generalities. Now, the Series 63 is a very different test than the 79. It's not a product knowledge, not an evaluation, not accounting, state law, state fraud and prohibited practice. It's state law, not federal law. There is some overlap to the 79, but not that much. So let's go through the areas. Regulation of investment advisors and investment advisor reps. The difference is the firms are investment advisors. The firms are broker-dealers. The people who work at the firms are IA reps or agents of the broker-dealer. So there's 6 questions on regulation of investment advisors and investment advisor reps. A big area of the exam is 18 questions on regulation of broker-dealers and agents. And remember, for the Series 79, you are considered an investment advisor representative. And believe it or not, on the Series 63, you are referred to as an agent of a broker-dealer. Third, regulation of securities and issuers. Very small area, only 3 questions. So 6 questions represents 10% of the exam. 18 questions represent 30% of the test. Huge area. 3 only represents 5%. The other 2 areas are communication with clients and prospects, which are 12 questions. And the 12 questions represent 20% of the examination. And the 15 questions are on ethical practices and obligations. And under that concept, there are 4 subcategories, and they are compensation, client funds and securities, conflicts of interest and other fiduciary duties, as well as cybersecurity and data protection. That represents 15 questions or 25% of the examination. Now, the total is 60 questions. You have an hour and 15 minutes. There are an extra 5 experimental questions. So just like the Series 79, there's some experimental. You're given 65 questions graded out of 60. You need a 72% to pass this exam, a 72% to pass this exam. Now, the 63 material, there are 7 chapters, very little overlap. Again, if you've taken the 79 or the 7, very little overlap. There are 6 online exams representative of the actual test. Similar to the 79, you're going to score a little bit less on our exams. Most people score, 5, 10 points higher on the actual test than on our exams. Read the material. The book is much, much smaller than the Series 79. Don't need to memorize. Concentrate on state regulation and something referred to as the Uniform Securities Act, which is the model law of the NASA, which each state either incorporates in whole or makes some changes to. So they don't test you on the law of California or the law of New York, even though they could be slightly different. They test you on one law called the Uniform Securities Act, and then you'll see questions on the exam according to the NASA Statement of Policy on Unethical Business Practices, according to the NASA Statement of Policy on Custody of Funds and Securities. You'll see things like that on the examination, and there's a facts-based question, definitely some judgment calls on best practices. And again, just like the Series 79, do the exams Q&A first, then do the by topic to strengthen your knowledge, and do a few of the closed book exams to make sure you're scoring well over 72%. Now be careful. Many students find this exam very tricky, so study our questions very carefully and the style, because the style of the Series 63 is different than the style of the Series 79, because it's not a FINRA test, this is a NASA exam. Now lastly is where the Series 79 is a banking exam, the Series 63 is not geared to investment banking whatsoever. The exam is focused primarily on people taking other tests, let's say the Series 7 or something called the Series 6, which is a mutual fund exam, and geared to those people that sell securities to individual investors. So again, the emphasis on selling securities, not on banking on the 63. Some people take the Series 63 too lightly. Sometimes some firms don't provide a class, some firms do. Either way, whether it's an online class, an on-demand class, a live class for the 63, make sure you study the information very carefully. It's really important in order to pass the exam. So last up, we just want to mention in general, some of your firms will have you attend a live class. It could be a regularly scheduled class or an on-site class where one of the STC instructors will come in and train you. And usually for the Series 79, it's a 3-day class. The 63 is a half-day class. And here's what we do in the class. The class is geared specifically for one purpose only, to get you to pass the test. We review the information which we assume you've read prior to the class. Hopefully you've did a couple of exams as well for either one of the courses. And the hope is that if you've done a couple of tests and you're having trouble with certain areas, when the instructor goes through that concept, the hope would be that you have a better understanding of that information. Let me give you an example. You've read through the chapters that are important. You've done 2 or 3 tests or before the class starts. And while the class is going on, you're doing exams in the evening. You're in the class and the instructor is discussing, let's say, what information can be gathered through the proxy and the difference between a merger proxy and a standard annual proxy. And you've gotten a couple of questions wrong, and it's not just the dates, it's the concept of why you have one versus the other. When do you file one and not the other? And the instructor's explaining that. And as the instructor's explaining that, you just realize why you got that question wrong. And no matter what happens, when you take that actual test, because you just listen to that concept being explained by the instructors, you get the question right. That's the goal. The instructor is going to smile, making sure that you knew the information, because there's nothing better to an STC instructor than hearing someone who's just taken the test say, I've passed the exam, thank you. Just the term pass the exam is good enough for us. So it's really important. That's our whole existence. That's what we focus on. One thing and one thing only, making sure you pass the licensing exams your firms have paid for or you've paid for. And that's really important to us. Remember, some of your firms where you're taking the exam right after the class, sometimes you have a few days in between, so it's really important to budget your time appropriately. You want to make sure you don't understudy. And what sometimes people do is they ask people who have taken the test a year before or 2 years before, hey, did you really study? Sometimes they're honest and they tell you how hard they really studied. Sometimes they forget how hard they studied. But in actuality, most people study really hard to pass the exams because they don't want to fail. They don't want to be that person coming back to their group with another 20, 30, or 50, or 100 people where everyone's passed except for them, where failure isn't an option. If you study the information, if you do our exams and listen to in the class or listen to the information recorded, or just go through the material, you will pass the exam. So, again, to conclude, we're glad you bought an STC product. We look forward to having you in the class. We look forward to your emails in terms of if you have any questions. Our main number is 1-800-STC-1223. That's 782-1223. And you can contact an instructor. You can contact the customer service professional. We're here to help you. Good luck on the exams and good luck in your career, and thank you for choosing STC.